for me, one of the fundamental parts of being a Canadian is that we pay into our system. And it is a social system that is there. It's supposed to lift you up when you're down. Employment insurance is one of those systems that you pay into all of your life, all of your working career. You have no choice but to pay into it. And it really should have been there when people most needed it. For me, that was extremely unjust. I had to take some action.
Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News, bringing you a union representative who is calling on the Justin Trudeau Liberals to scrap the implementation of new employment insurance codes that were put in place to prevent equitable access to the social safety net that all gainfully employed Canadians are forced to pay into. Employment insurance, also called EI, is a federal program that provides temporary income support to unemployed workers. And as of October 15th, 2021, Employment and Social Development Canada, ESDC, gave employers instructions on how to issue employment codes that denied individuals their ability to access this social safety net that they pay into. Workers who were not in compliance with a workplace vaccine mandate were given the following guidance. When the employee doesn't report to work because they refuse to comply with your mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policy, use code E for quit or N for leave of absence. When you suspend or terminate an employee for not complying with your mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policy, use code M for dismissal. On June the 6th, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms put out a press release that is summarized nicely into these two sentences. The government's current policy to deny EI benefits to those who lost their jobs for not getting the COVID-19 vaccines is not in line with the case law in this area. Rather, it is arbitrary and being used to advance a political agenda. And there is at least one union representative out there doing something about it. Dan Jansen is petitioning the federal government regarding the ongoing coercion in place that denies anyone not signing up for a revolving door of pharma injections their access to the benefits that they have to pay into. Petition number 4072 calls on the government to provide retroactive employment insurance payments to workers who were unjustly denied due to vaccination status. The petition says that the government has negatively impacted workers by restricting access to EI when vaccine mandates were implemented in October 2021, that those affected workers were forced on unpaid leave, terminated, or dismissed due to their personal decision to not get vaccinated. Then the petition outlines the new ROE codes and calls the government's actions coercive by imposing financial hardship as consequences of remaining unvaccinated. Joining me now to discuss this initiative and his petition is Dan Jansen. Check it out.
I work at Toronto Pearson International Airport. I've been working there loading aircraft for the past 22 years. Recently, I was elected to be a representative of one of the labor unions at Pearson, representing my coworkers on all sorts of issues, whether that's contract negotiations or labor disputes, grievances, arbitrations. Those sort of matters. Of course, when the pandemic hit, we were dealing with lots of pandemic-related issues. It was quite challenging for myself. I also have a political background. I've ran in the 2018 provincial election, as well as the 2019 provincial election, both for the NDP in my riding, in one of the ridings here in Simcoe County. I've been very politically involved in lobbying, whether that's lobbying on all sorts of labor issues or even during the pandemic on pandemic issues like raising the interim orders or on trying to get our unvaccinated coworkers to be paid for employment insurance or to be paid by their employers.
Right, because we saw those new codes come into effect if employees were in non-compliance with a vaccine mandate that oddly wouldn't have been a term of their employment when they first signed on. So you've launched this petition most recently. And can you tell me a bit about what made you initiate the petition the way that it is currently written?
Well, I was seeing firsthand my coworkers who chose not to disclose or who are unvaccinated be denied their employment. Of course, right when the pandemic hit, we know that the minister responsible put out word that not only would you lose your job, you would also, or be suspended, you would also have no ability to collect employment insurance. So effectively, we were, taking away the ability for our coworkers to be able to survive or feed their families unless they were able to seek other work.
Employers in a wide range of sectors are starting to lay off employees for refusing to get vaccinated. Will individuals who lose a job for refusing to get vaccinated qualify for employment insurance?
That's a very important question, and we're looking into it. My current thinking on it is that's a choice, and of course, not counting medical exemptions or valid reasons for not having the vaccination. But if you choose to leave your job for that reason, my current thinking and the current advice I'm getting is you won't qualify for EI.
For me, one of the fundamental parts of being a Canadian is that we pay into our system. And it is a social system that is there. It's supposed to lift you up when you're down. Employment insurance is one of those systems that you pay into all of your life, all of your working career. You have no choice but to pay into it. And it really should have been there when people most needed it. For me, that was extremely unjust. I had to take some action. I did start speaking with the Liberal MP who was assisting on the inside of the party with lifting the interim orders. A petition very similar to this one was drafted, calling on the government to lift their interim orders, but also calling on them to provide retroactive payments for workers who were denied access during the pandemic. And it was going well, however, it did not materialize. I brought the petition forward to Member of Parliament John Broussard. He's the government House Leader for the Conservatives. He was more than happy to sponsor the petition once I explained what it is that we were after. I had been seeing not only Mr. Broussard, but Ms. Lanceman day after day talking about the interim orders, the unjust actions of the government.
Everyone knows that vaccination saves lives. 163,000 lives would have been saved in the United States just with Omicron if they had had a higher vaccination rate. In Canada, Mr. Speaker, we have been vaccinated to a large number, to a large extent, and that's why we have been successful at having one of the lowest rates of death in the world with COVID-19.
This was just one of them, and naturally, I felt the Conservative Party would help me, and ultimately they did in sponsoring this petition. And I'm glad to see that it's getting some support from Canadian public.
Likewise, and I was also pleased to see that it was a Conservative member who did sponsor it. Did you try to reach out to anyone in the NDP? I mean, typically they're the Labour Party, and I would be interested to know if you had tried to garner any support from an MP there in terms of this petition.
No, I did not try to reach out to an MP. It's unfortunate. I did not feel that there would be support from the party. They had been supporting the Liberals all along throughout this pandemic, especially after seeing what happened with the Emergencies Act. Going back to when the vaccination mandates were put in place, you had the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, even calling to employers saying, unvaccinated workers who do not comply should be, disciplined.
We know that the vast majority of Canadians want to do their part to keep people safe and want to get vaccinated. And we also know that the vast majority of Canadians believe in having some way to prove that vaccination, having a vaccine passport. And we know that people on the front line that are providing care or providing services directly to Canadians can pose a higher risk and should be vaccinated. So we would work with unions and work with the workers on the ground to make sure we establish a way to move forward, but we absolutely believe that there needs to be mandatory vaccines, and there would be consequences for those who are not able to or not willing to do that, and we could look at what those consequences are.
Or even including up to termination. I found that to be very concerning, being somebody who believes wholeheartedly in what the NDP represents. And it's unfortunate that the party's kind of gone to be, I guess, the stepping stool for the Liberal Party these days. I do hope they can get back to their roots at some point. To me, I think generating some some conversations in Canadian households using a petition like this, having people talk about how unfair it is, the government's actions and what they did to workers that chose not to disclose or be vaccinated. To me, those having those types of conversations take place is something that's beneficial. Ultimately, it would be very beneficial if the government changed their minds and they provided employment insurance to all the workers that were denied due to their vaccination status. The government can redeem themselves by turning this around. They can remove the codes so that they're not used again in the future. They can provide the data to show Canadians and be open and transparent with us as to how many workers were denied. We'd be able to get that data because the employment insurance codes that came in, or the ROEs that came in from employers, were coded in a way that was meant to ensure that they were denied access. The data definitely should be there. And then ultimately, they can provide for periods of unemployment, employment insurance. And I say periods of unemployment because I know that workers had no choice but to go out and get other work. So they of course would not be eligible for full amounts if they were working, but for those periods of unemployment, especially at the start of the pandemic, workers deserved to be paid their employment insurance. Again, they paid into it all of their lives, all of their working lives. They paid into a system that was supposed to be there when it was most needed, and those workers needed access. They should be granted that access. For my other Canadians, I think we have to live with compassion. We heard this over and over again. We're all in this together. And I think very much we were all in this together until some in our government decided that it would be more beneficial to divide us. And that's really what this Liberal government did. They used this as a wedge issue, a political wedge issue, rather than what was doing right for all of Canada.
You deserve a government that's going to continue to say, get vaccinated. And you know what? If you don't want to get vaccinated, that's your choice. But don't think you can get on a plane or a train beside vaccinated people.
For other labor representatives, employers that are out there, I know that we were all put in a very difficult situation. It was not easy. We were balancing the health and safety of our coworkers with what was right and wrong, and that was not always an easy task to do. I think that there's a lot of work that can be done still, but I'm sure that if you put your heart into the work that you're doing, this is something that we can fix.
Dan further urges the government to remove these codes entirely, release data on the codes by showing how many workers were negatively affected by the restriction of access to employment benefits, and allow for retroactive eligibility for all workers who were unjustly denied their access. I have filed an access to information request seeking the number of Canadians who were given the above mentioned record of employment codes, so please consider chipping in to help offset that cost if you're able to at rebelinvestigates.com. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. Vaccine passports continue to haunt Canadians who stood in integrity for their own bodily autonomy, and the fight is far from over. We crowdfund legal defense for clients that were onboarded with the registered Canadian charity called the Democracy Fund, and we have made a special website for you to be able to follow along and to donate to help in their legal battles. All of that information can be found at fightvaccinepassports.com. That's fightvaccinepassports.com.